My inspiration often comes from research. I think different stories come about in different ways. Um, Very often, I start with an atmosphere that is uh, an imagined tactile atmosphere, but also a visual atmosphere of a world that I want to explore. And then I try to find a story that can accompany that. So, um, with The Witch, for example, um, I felt that I needed to write a horror movie. I needed to write a genre movie if I wanted to ever get anything financed, and I thought that it would likely take place in New England because for financial reasons I'd have to shoot it in my proverbial parents' backyard. And then I thought, well, a witch is the archetypal New England spook, so that's good. So that was pragmatic. But then I remembered as a kid, like really thinking about the idea, weird kid, maybe, that people who grew up in the reign of Queen Elizabeth were like walking around in the woods behind where I grew up, and that atmosphere and the sense of dread and and a real witch uh, that was exciting to me. So then research to then find a story that can accompany that atmosphere. I'm researching and writing in tandem. So I research enough to write some more, and then I research enough to write some more. If a studio's paying me to write my script, I have to give them a treatment of an overview of the whole thing because they need to know that like they're gonna like this thing or not. If I'm writing with a co-writer, we also need to uh, break down the script in a very clear, organized way before we begin writing it because we need to be on the same page. But if I'm writing something on spec by myself, it tends to be a little bit more weirdy. And certainly I have like my notes that where I look at first act, second act, third act, or so often I use a 5-act structure. Um, but it is loose and kind of evolves. And all these things obviously evolve. Even if you have a treatment that's very clear, once you get into the nitty gritty of things, problems come up and you haven't connected all the dots, And then also because all of my things that I've ever written ever or adapted have been period, um, the more research I do, the more I realize, oh shoot, like that scene is wrong because uh, you know whatever. So then you need to knock down the towers in your sandcastle and rebuild them with the right architecture. So building an atmosphere for a movie is cumulative, and from the the dialect to the design of the physical world to the format that you shoot the film on. The Witch is fairly conventional. It has a few things that are a little different, but obviously the Lighthouse has quite extreme format. I wanted to shoot in black and white to convey the bleakness and the austerity of their lifestyle and their world. On a very surface level, black and white also just says old. The aspect ratio is a rare aspect ratio, 119:1, which was an early sound aspect ratio, which again says old, but it also is a better. I mean, look, if you look at the history of painting, like painters or photography, painters and photographers will tell you there's different canvases for different images. And I think if filmmakers could destroy cinemas and televisions and rebuild them new for every story they were telling, there would be films in a lot more different aspect ratios. But we were aware that this was going to be projected on CinemaScope screens and on widescreen TVs, but we felt that it was okay for it to be in this box. This is a better aspect ratio for framing vertical objects like lighthouse towers and better for conveying the cramped interiors. I think because it's a claustrophobic movie, like knowing that it's going to be a box inside the CinemaScope screen worked for us. We also shot on black and white negative, which hasn't changed since the 1950s and has kind of a primitive feel. It bottoms out the blacks bottom out suddenly in a way that's very like aggressive and satisfying. It has a toothy grain and micro contrast. And then we wanted to go even further. We would have wanted to have shot on orthochromatic negative had it existed for motion picture cameras, but it doesn't anymore. But basically, in the olden days, in still photography and in cinema, film was not sensitive to red light. So if you look at daguerreotypes and things and you wonder why everyone is so like blotched and tan and stuff, it's because the reds in their faces are rendering black. So we used a custom filter to kind of have that look in our film as well. And then to sort of soften the harshness of the XX film stock, and to also, again, give something that was sort of transportive and older. We were using antique lenses, most of them from the 30s, but one as old as like 1905, I believe, an uncoated Pathé lens, which was only used for kind of lumberjack flashbacks, but nevertheless, it was used. I don't generally think about actors when I'm writing my stories. I generally think of just the characters. I probably should have thought of Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe when I wrote The Lighthouse, but I had a kind of superstition that I don't imagine actors unless I'm positive that they will say yes. So in my next movie, I did write a role with Willem in mind, and I knew he'd say yes, and he did. And we closed his deal the other day. As far as preparing Rob and Willem, I give them a lot of my research, but tailored to their role. And each role requires different things, and each actor requires different things. So like both of them got like copious amounts of dialogue tapes and dialogue instruction, or dialect tapes and dialect instruction, but obviously for different dialects. And I did give Willem some documentaries and books and things about lighthouse keeping and lighthouse keepers, but with Rob, it was a lot of stuff to build a backstory. And I wasn't so much instructing him that this is your backstory, but here are tools and references for you to construct something for yourself. Sometimes I'm thinking about the technical aspects of filmmaking while I'm writing. Sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I'm thinking about like exactly what the shots are. I see them very clearly as I write the scene. Sometimes it's just a story and I know we're going to have to like get there later. Sometimes there's a sequence with stunts and things that I know is going to be a nightmare, but I feel like it's just too important to the story and I kind of have to be blind to the difficulties in order to just know that we have to move forward. And sometimes those things are too difficult and I have to rewrite them, or too expensive and I have to rewrite them later. After The Witch and The Lighthouse, I'm very, very cognizant about what is going on if I'm including an animal. I'm sorry to admit, but I don't tend to get writer's block. And that's because I'm so research focused. So if I'm feeling stuck, I can just pick up a book and read a sentence that's inspiring, or even sometimes misread a sentence that's inspiring and can get me going. That doesn't always happen, but or if I've realized a week's gone by and all I've done is research, then I feel quite ashamed and I have to write, what if this, 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 forever. And finally, one of those what ifs gets me out of it. Sometimes another, like getting out of writer's block, I think about what are some other films or plays that like explore this story beat that I can't figure out. Like maybe I should look at them and take some notes. Generally, like it's never one. It's like not one to one. But what it does is you look at enough things and you're like, okay, I just have to do my own thing, So there's different techniques for kind of breaking through that. But those are some. The two or three biggest bits of advice are sort of, one, you have to like find your own voice. It's okay to start out being derivative, because that's how we become ourselves. But what people who want to hire you are looking for something new. I know that there is this idea that like people want studios want the same, and it's like yes and no. It's like comfortable enough, but also we've never seen it before. So the more that you cultivate your own, what's special about you, what your superpower is, just embrace that. The other things are, you don't know how hard you have to work. Like, you can't imagine it, and work even harder than that. It takes so much hard work. And then the other thing is, it's harder for a writer, but relationships are really important. It's not about schmoozing. I mean, look, if you're great at schmoozing, you can make a career out of schmoozing. So good for you if you're that person. But for me, it really is about finding other people that you want to collaborate with. And like, no job is too crappy. If you work on the worst short film of all time in history that you can't put on your resume, but you've gained some experience and you got enough money to pay the rent, you might have met someone who shares the same interest with you. And maybe they get a job being a line producer on a commercial in a couple of years, who can bring you on, and so then you can pay your rent and da-da-da-da-da. But it's about mutual respect. It's not schmoozing. And my closest collaborators, Jaron Blaschke, my cinematographer, and Louise Ford, that's kind of how we came up together. So by working incredibly hard and by creating relationships, that can help create the third magical ingredient, or the fourth, because the other one was your voice, which is luck. Luck is luck. But if you have these other three things going, it can help hopefully put you in a situation to create some luck. The amount of writers that inspire me are many. And I often kind of think about my cinema in terms of literary genre more than movies. Obviously, I watch a ton of films, and that's clear in my movies. I think you can see many of my influences very clearly. I think The Witch is derivative in a way that I'm not particularly proud of, but as I mentioned, you're working on it. The Lighthouse, I feel like my influences more feel like I've put them into my alchemical beaker and poured out something new, mostly. But another piece of advice is to just watch as many films as you possibly can and take tons of notes on them. Read as many plays as you can. Read as many novels as you can. You gotta take in information and learn about structure and choice and withholding and subtext and inverting of expectations through other people's work. The Shining, I've watched too many times. I've watched The Shining so many times, taken notes on it so many times. I've watched it in fast forward. I've watched it in slow motion. I've watched it without sound. I've listened to only the sound. I've done timings on scenes. I can't watch that probably again. But I watched it a lot before it died. I killed it.